Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Beyond Day One. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about the interview process. We've talked about everything from anxiety to when to ask the right questions at the right time during the interview. Today, we're going to wrap up and we're going to talk about how to close things out the right way. In order to do that, I'm going to bring in some help as usual. I've got with me the one and only Gen Z John. And of course, on the other side is Philip Rich. Guys, we've been talking about interviewing, and we haven't talked yet about how to close the interview. And in closing the interview, I think we have a few things we want to talk about because oftentimes people, especially young professionals, they do their interview, and once they hang up from the interview or they walk out of the room, they think they're finished. And now it's just a matter of waiting to see if somebody calls me back and tells me I have the job or not. Well, there are a couple of things that you actually want to do that are going to make a difference, and that could be the difference between you getting the job over someone else or not. And that's what happens after you close the interview. Now, let me say this really quickly. When you're ending the interview, there are a couple of things that I want to encourage you to make sure that you do. First of all, as we said in the beginning, very early on, that maintaining good eye contact throughout the interview is an important piece of the puzzle. And you want to do that, especially at the end. You also, if you're interviewing in person, you want to extend the same firm handshake that you started the interview off at the end of the interview. And then you want to make sure you ask one good question at the end of your interview amongst the others that you may have, which we talked about in previous episodes. But we didn't talk about this one question that's important, and that's to understand what the next steps are for you. What happens next? Will there be a time frame that I'll expect to hear from you? Is there something more that you need from me? Those are the kinds of things that you want to know as a part of the next steps in the interview. Now, once you leave that interview, whether it's by Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or whether you're in person, excuse me, you now want to take the next step and do your follow up. You guys, before I get to that, any feedback about when the interview is ending that you think that our listeners would be beneficial to hear? How about you, Phil?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind, and it's a kind of a universal principle, whether it's in talking about job interviews or even in the real estate market or sales and things like that, follow up. Follow up is a huge, huge thing. Follow up and follow through. Especially like once the interview's over, it's good to have maybe some type of thing that you do to reach back out, just to have a touch point with them after the interview's already been concluded, maybe a day or two later, to send them a note and say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to sit and interview with you. Just something to let them know, hey, kind of like that old phrase says, the squeaky wheel gets the deal. There's there's a lot of truth to that. Just that effort, a little bit of additional effort in the follow up and follow through could sometimes make the difference between someone who actually lands the job and someone who doesn't.
Yeah, that's great advice, feedback. And if there was a number one in this list of point one, is after the interview is ended, the first thing you want to do is follow up. You should follow up within 24 hours with a personalized email that says, basically, thank you for the opportunity to interview, and points out, references a specific point or conversation point in the interview. I particularly enjoyed talking about the future of your organization and where you see me fitting in, or something to that effect, where you bring back an element of the conversation that says, I was connected, I was paying attention and engaged. And so you definitely want to bring that piece to the table. Now, I also want to tell you that there's a second side to this. And that second side is I want you to send a thank you note, even if you're not interested in the job anymore. So you might find yourself in a position that after you've gone through the interview and you've thought about it a little bit, you might feel like it's not the right fit for you, that it's not going to match out with what you're thinking and what you desire for your life. Even when the job's not going to fit, you still send that thank you note. You thank them for the interview, and then also add, after further consideration, I've decided that this job may not be a great fit for me. And so share that with them and thank them again for their time and go ahead and send that off. John, what are you thinking?
I 100% agree. I think there's a saying that I heard that if you basically if you make a good impression, we all know first impressions are important, and they make a well their first impression. But last impressions last forever. It doesn't matter how good your first impression is with your interviewer. It could be great. It could be not so great, but how your last interaction, your last little bit of dialogue with this person will last forever, especially if they just got to know you. So leaving that last little bit, even though it doesn't sound like it'll do anything for you, it definitely puts it spawns like the just kind of like the concept of maybe they might have missed out a little bit. I want to say that personally, but the reality is, and all in all, you want to make sure that you're you're not sounding bitter. You're not sounding like there's just some sort of undealt with emotion there just because you didn't get the job or you didn't feel like it matched. You just want to make sure you're fully communicating how you're thinking and feeling about this position, and just sending out that one last note will leave a better impression that your first impression will ever leave. So
Yeah, that's good, John. One of the other things I want to tell you is that leaving that note also, you might not think about it, but it may serve you in the future, especially depending on where you live. When you live in Atlanta, you might do 10 interviews around town, and those pieces will never connect. But when you're in smaller towns, or, you're in a town where some of the types of industry that you might be applying for are connected, it's going to be very interesting because you might apply with this person and leave them a nice thank you note, and then they move to another company and you find yourself applying there and they remember you for that thank you note. So you never know when you're creating an opportunity, when you're creating a bridge for your future. So always be thinking about what future you hopes to have instead of what's going on in your immediate right now. The next piece of the puzzle is something that so many people don't do that you need to do, and that is some constructive self assessment. It's never enough to just let the interview end, you send your little note, and you go off happy. You should really consider that interview and take a few minutes to say, how did I do in that interview? What questions were a challenge for me? What questions came across and I really need to work on my answer for, so the next time I'm asked that, I'll be more ready. There's an opportunity for you to consider. There's an old book that says, Consider Your Ways. And it's a great opportunity for you to take a look in the mirror and see how you can improve your performance from interview to interview so you get to the place that you ultimately want to be. Philip, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, definitely self-assessment is super important because you want to be able to learn from every experience that you have and that you go through. I remember hearing a phrase a while, or I guess like a saying from a while back. I thought it was really good and it kind of stuck with me. It said, "Whenever you fall, pick something up."
Mm,
I love that. It's like there's times in life, obviously, where you're going to have some mistakes. You're going to do some things that you regret, possibly, but there's always some type of a seed of a lesson in there somewhere, something you can learn from that situation. And in a big way, mistakes can be some of your greatest teachers because if nothing else, hey man, you found out what you shouldn't do the next time by looking at some of the
right,
mistakes you make. And that's
right.
actually valuable information, and it's kind of like what that famous thing that Thomas Edison said when he was working on perfecting the incandescent light bulb. He said, because it's been documented, he had over 10,000 experiments that did not work. And he said, "You know what? I haven't failed 10,000 times. I've just simply found 10,000 ways that didn't work." And I
Mm,
love having that mentality about the mistakes you make, because it that way you're not focusing on it to a place where it it brings you down or begins to kind of make you feel bad about yourself or beat yourself up, but instead you can look at it and go, okay, I know what not to do next time, and I'm going to learn and get better from this.
that's fantastic, Philip. The last part that we want to give you really quickly before we wrap up is navigate rejection and ghosting with graciousness.
Yeah.
You want to realize, look, if I can just be honest with you, in some organizations, the hiring and HR process is jacked up.
Yeah.
I'm just
Absolutely.
being I'm just being honest with you. There are some organizations that don't do that well, and they need some help to get better at what they're doing. And so that's where you get some of the ghosting that happens. But the other one that everybody deals with is the concept of rejection. And just remember, whenever you receive, look, I can't tell you how many rejection letters that I've given for interviews for a skill that I'm great at. I've had I've been more skilled than what I've applied for, and got notes saying, after looking at the resume, we decided your skills don't fit our organization. I'm like, don't fit, and so I had to check myself because don't fit could mean you're overqualified.
Yeah.
It
True.
could just be a standard letter that's going out. But ultimately, it's not a reflection on who I am as a person. And that's one of the things that I think that we all need to do is we need to separate rejection from who I am. John, do you
Yeah.
have a quick thought on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to give an example. When I first started putting myself into the workforce, I definitely thought I was that person because so far, out of the 2 to 3 jobs that I had, I landed at every single interview, with that 16-year-old mindset. And so I was applying to a retailer, and they just never reached out to me. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, it's been a week since the interview. Like, I thought that I had this job down pat, and I couldn't wrap my mind around it because I was so obsessed with why they didn't want to hire me. Why wouldn't they want to hire me? I worked at Chick-fil-A. I worked at all these great places. I'd be a great fit for your company, right? Um, and after like just being miserable about it for like a few weeks, it turns out is because I couldn't work on a Sunday that they rejected me. And so I'm over
Oh,
here thinking maybe they just didn't like my personality. Da, 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 da. No, it was just this one day availability that they couldn't agree with. And so, but they didn't say anything. And so I just took it way too deep. But it was just one of those things where like you obsess over the details where it just really could just be your availability didn't match with what the company was looking for. Hard lesson learned there.
Yeah. So don't let things like rejection get you off your game. Just realize that for whatever reason that job isn't for you and go on and apply for the next place. The other thing I'd encourage you to do along those lines is don't wait until you get a rejection to apply for the next place. If you find a couple of jobs that you like, go ahead and apply for all of them. And then go ahead, go through your interviews and then follow through the process. You might find that if you get interviews at all of them, then you can compare them and determine which one you might prefer to be your primary choice, then a secondary, and then the third choice. And then once you get those interviews and you get the potential offer, then you'll see that there may be a positive outcome there for you. All right, that's it. We're done talking. Well, we're not done talking about interviews. We're going to keep talking about them in different ways, but we've kind of given you a big picture here to look at, to consider on your interview process. And all of that goes alongside of the series that we've been doing by way of workshop called From Anxiety to Offer. In that workshop, we've talked about the whole concept of being anxious for an interview and how to fix that through preparation. We've talked about what interviewers are looking for, the translation gap, reading the room, and even we're talking about a playbook to help you to put all the pieces together and close out strong. You can find those videos on our YouTube channel at Found for Success, or just look up Foundations for Success in your search bar on YouTube. Until next time, I'm David, he's John and Philip, and we're out.